What would it actually take for you to lose your home? Not your job, not your entire income, just one thing going wrong at the wrong time. A medical bill that comes in higher than expected. A car repair you cannot delay. A week of missed work. For a growing number of Americans, that is enough. Right now, millions of people are living in a position where their entire financial stability depends on nothing unexpected happening. No disruption, no delay, no extra cost. That kind of stability is fragile because the math no longer leaves room for error. Income comes in, and almost all of it goes out. Rent takes the largest share, then food, then utilities, then everything else that cannot be avoided. By the time the month ends, there is almost nothing left to absorb anything new. This is why the line between being housed and losing that stability has become thinner than most people realize. And the people crossing that line are not disappearing into some separate category of misfortune. They are still working, still earning, still trying to keep up with the same obligations they had before. The question is not why this is happening to a small group of people who made the wrong decisions. The real question is why it is starting to happen everywhere at the same time to people who did everything they were supposed to do. This is part of our Collapse series. Here is exactly what is happening and how far it has already gone. Part 1. The math doesn't leave room for error. Start with a calculation that most people have never sat down and done carefully. Take a full-time worker earning between $18 and $20 an hour. After taxes and deductions, monthly take-home pay typically lands somewhere between $2,400 and $2,600. That number varies by state and benefits structure, but the range is consistent enough to show the problem clearly. Now map that against fixed expenses. In many parts of the country, a basic one-bedroom apartment costs between $1,800 and $2,500 per month. In higher demand areas, it goes well beyond that. But even at the lower end of that range, housing alone is already consuming the majority of take-home income. What remains is not flexible. Food costs have to be covered every week. Transportation is required to maintain employment. Insurance, utilities, and basic communication services are not optional in a functioning household. Once those are accounted for, the remaining balance is often close to zero. This is where the system becomes sensitive. Stability is no longer determined by income level alone. It is determined by whether the current balance can absorb disruption. And in this structure, there is almost no capacity to do that. Data from the Federal Reserve confirms that a significant portion of households would need to borrow or sell something to cover even a small, unexpected expense. That is not a sign of mismanagement. It reflects how compressed the margin has become. What changes here is the trigger point. In previous economic cycles, financial breakdown typically followed job loss. Income would stop, and pressure would build from there. In the current environment, the breakdown can begin while income is still coming in. A reduction in hours, a delayed payment, a single expense arriving earlier than expected. Each of these is small in isolation, but within a system that has no buffer, they do not stay isolated. They accumulate, and once that accumulation starts, the sequence is difficult to reverse. Savings, if they exist, are used first. Credit becomes the next layer. That extends the timeline, but does not solve the imbalance. When credit reaches its limit, the remaining gap becomes visible, and the options for managing it become very limited. Part 2. Employment is becoming less reliable. The layer underneath that calculation depends on one condition staying true. The income has to remain stable. That assumption is becoming less reliable. Over the past 2 years, job cuts have spread across multiple sectors simultaneously. Technology companies reduced headcount in large waves and received the most media attention. But outside of that, retail chains have been closing locations, logistics companies have been adjusting capacity, and manufacturing firms have been reducing labor while increasing automation. According to Challenger, Gray, and Christmas, a substantial number of job cuts in 2025 were tied to restructuring rather than temporary slowdowns. That distinction matters. Restructuring is not a pause. It is a redesign of how the work gets done. When a role is removed through restructuring, it is often replaced by a different system software, outsourced teams, or a smaller number of workers handling a wider range of tasks. In many cases, the original position does not return. This changes the nature of employment in ways standard labor data struggles to capture. In the past, losing a job often meant finding a similar role in a related sector. When multiple sectors adjust simultaneously, those pathways narrow. Workers can still find work, but not always at the same level of pay or stability. The structure of employment is shifting toward contract work, part-time schedules, and task-based platforms. These roles provide income, but not always consistency. Fixed expenses do not adjust to match variable income. Rent does not decrease because hours were reduced. Bills remain constant even when earnings change. There is also a statistical blind spot that makes this harder to track. Most labor data operates on a binary framework. A person is either employed or unemployed. That structure works when employment is stable and clearly defined. It becomes less accurate when income is fragmented. If a worker loses hours, they are still counted as employed. If a contractor loses a client, there is no formal record of separation. If demand on a platform declines, the worker remains listed as active even if earnings have fallen significantly. From a statistical perspective, nothing significant has changed. From a financial perspective, everything has. The system measures employment status. It does not measure income stability. And income stability is what household budgets actually run on. This is where a large part of the current pressure is building quietly, without appearing in the headline numbers that most people use to assess whether the economy is working. Part 3. Costs are fixed and higher than before. While income has become less predictable, the cost side of the equation has moved in the opposite direction. It has become more fixed, and in many cases, significantly higher than before. Housing is the most visible part of this shift. Research from the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University shows that roughly half of renters in the United States are now spending more than 30% of their income on housing. A significant share are spending well beyond that threshold. Once housing reaches that level, it limits everything else. Rent is not an adjustable expense in the short term. It is locked in. Any increase in other costs has to be absorbed elsewhere. And those other costs have also moved upward. Food prices increased over the past several years and have remained elevated rather than returning to previous levels. Utility bills have risen across many regions. Insurance premiums, particularly for auto and property, have increased significantly, reflecting higher repair costs and revised risk assessments. Individually, each increase might seem manageable. Together, they change the structure of a household budget in a way that is difficult to adjust around. What used to be a distribution of expenses across multiple categories becomes a concentration. A larger share of income is now allocated to basic survival housing, food, utilities, insurance. That leaves less room for everything else, including savings and any kind of financial cushion. Once most of income is committed to fixed expenses, there are fewer ways to adjust. Discretionary spending can be reduced, but only so far. Beyond that point, the remaining expenses are simply not optional. You cannot decide not to pay rent. You cannot skip utilities entirely. The floor of necessary spending is higher than it used to be, and the income available to meet it has not grown at the same pace. This is the core of what defines the current cost of living pressure. Not simply rising prices, but a shift in how much of the average income is required just to maintain basic stability. And unlike short-term inflation, this kind of shift does not reverse quickly. Prices may stop increasing, but they do not return to previous levels. The higher baseline remains. Once that baseline is set, the pressure becomes constant rather than temporary. Part 4. The last buffer is being removed. When housing costs move beyond reach, the transition does not happen all at once. There is usually an intermediate stage where people adjust their living situation to avoid complete displacement. Over the past several years, one of the most common forms of that adjustment has been vehicle living. Cars, vans, and RVs functioning as a temporary solution, not ideal, but practical. They allow people to stay near their workplace, maintain a daily routine, and avoid entering the formal shelter system. For many, it has been a way to buy time. But that option is becoming more limited. Cities across the United States have been tightening regulations around where and when people can remain in vehicles overnight. Restrictions are being applied to residential zones, commercial districts, and areas near schools and public facilities. In some cases, entire sections of a city are no longer accessible for overnight parking. These policies are not uniform across the country, but the direction is consistent. A significant legal shift came from a Supreme Court decision in 2024 that gave municipalities broader authority to enforce anti-camping rules on public land. While the ruling does not specifically target vehicle living, it expands the ability of local governments to regulate how public space is used for shelter. That has practical consequences. Once a vehicle is treated strictly as transportation rather than shelter, enforcement becomes faster and more direct. Citations can be issued, vehicles can be towed, and the process does not require the same procedural steps as formal housing eviction. For someone already under financial strain, the cost of retrieving a towed vehicle is often prohibitive. Fees accumulate daily and quickly exceed what the owner can pay. Shelter alternatives remain constrained. Most operate near capacity, with eligibility requirements and waiting periods. The buffer between instability and full displacement is narrowing. As it narrows, the shift from housed to unhoused happens faster than it used to. Part 5. The numbers are breaking records. Once that buffer disappears, the situation becomes visible across cities very quickly. According to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, more than 770,000 people were counted as experiencing homelessness in 2024. That represents the largest recorded total in recent data and a significant increase compared to previous years. But the total number is only one part of what is changing. The profile of who is entering homelessness is shifting in ways that are equally significant. A larger share of individuals are coming directly from housing instability rather than long-term unemployment. Some are working. Others recently lost housing specifically due to rising costs rather than a complete loss of income. This indicates that the issue is not limited to the absence of work. It is tied directly to affordability. There is also a measurable increase in families. Data shows a rise in children experiencing housing instability, which means entire households are being displaced at once rather than isolated individuals. Shelter capacity has not expanded at the same rate as demand. When occupancy reaches its limit, people are forced into informal arrangements or outdoor encampments. Encampments have become more visible in both large metropolitan areas and smaller cities across multiple states. But the response to encampments tends to focus on relocation areas are cleared, people are moved, and the groups often reform in nearby locations. Movement does not reduce the underlying number. It changes the distribution. The system responds to what can be seen and measured in a specific place. The pressure driving the increase is not located in any single place. It is distributed across the entire structure that leads people into that situation in the first place. And as more people enter this stage, the issue expands beyond housing and begins to affect how the broader systems around it operate. Part 6 cities are starting to break. As more people move into unstable housing situations, the effects begin to extend beyond individual households. They start to influence how cities function at a structural level. One of the clearest signals appears in commercial real estate. Office vacancy rates across the United States have remained significantly elevated compared to pre-2020 levels. Data from CBRE indicates that vacancies are well above historical norms, with some major cities experiencing even sharper increases. Fewer occupied offices means less foot traffic. Businesses, depending on that activity, restaurants, retail, service providers, see lower revenue. Some adapt, others close. Commercial property values begin to decline, reducing property tax revenue, a primary funding source for city budgets. At the same time, cities face higher costs for services related to housing instability, sanitation, public safety, emergency response. Revenue slows while expenditures rise. Public transit reflects the same pattern. Lower ridership means lower fare revenue, leading to service cuts that reduce access to employment for residents who depend on it most. What develops is a feedback loop. Economic activity slows in certain areas. Revenue declines, services become more constrained. Those constraints then contribute to further economic pressure on the households already struggling. This is not a sudden collapse. It is a gradual shift in how effectively urban systems operate. And when multiple systems begin to weaken at the same time, the impact is no longer isolated to one sector. It becomes part of the broader environment that people are already struggling to navigate. Part 7, the middle is now under pressure. The final shift does not happen at the bottom of the system. It happens in the middle. For decades, stability in the United States depended on a large group of middle-income households, not wealthy, but consistent. Earning enough to cover costs, contributing to local economies, and maintaining a degree of financial resilience. That layer is now under pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York reports that total household debt has reached record levels, with credit card balances alone exceeding $1 trillion. Interest rates on those balances remain elevated, which means carrying costs are higher and balances are harder to pay down. At the same time, surveys indicate that a growing share of households earning between $60,000 and $100,000 per year report difficulty keeping up with monthly expenses. These are not households at the poverty line. They are within what has traditionally been considered the stable middle. The pressure comes from multiple directions simultaneously. Housing costs are higher, insurance premiums have increased, basic expenses take a larger share of income than before. When those costs rise together, the margin that used to exist in middle-income budgets disappears entirely. This is visible in migration data. Census figures show consistent movement away from high-cost metros toward lower-cost regions. These moves include teachers, healthcare workers, and skilled trades, the people who keep communities functioning day to day. When that group leaves, local tax bases shrink, school enrollment declines, and community infrastructure changes in ways that are difficult and expensive to reverse. This is where the current situation begins to resemble something broader than a housing problem or a cost of living problem. It is multiple systems moving in the same direction simultaneously, and when that happens, the effects do not stay contained. They move through the entire structure. Conclusion: what you have seen across these 7 sections is not the result of a single failure. It is the result of several systems moving out of alignment simultaneously. Income has become less predictable, not always disappearing, but changing in ways that make planning harder. Costs have moved higher and stayed there. And the buffers that used to absorb pressure savings, flexible expenses, temporary housing options are no longer as available as they once were. Each of these shifts on its own would be manageable. Together, they create a structure where stability requires everything to go right simultaneously, and that is not a reliable condition on which to build a functioning household, let alone a functioning society. This is why the situation does not look like a traditional crisis. There is no single event marking the beginning, no clear turning point that anchors a date to the problem, just a steady accumulation of pressure across multiple areas of daily life, building quietly, consistently, and in ways that standard economic indicators are not fully designed to capture, because none of them were built to measure the combined effect of all these pressures operating at the same time. What defines this moment is not simply that prices are higher, it is how much of everyday income is now required just to maintain a basic standard of living. The question is not whether these trends exist, the data makes that clear. The question is how far they extend, how long they continue, and at what point the accumulation of pressure becomes something that can no longer be absorbed quietly. What in your own situation has felt most different in the past year? Drop it in the comments, I read every single one.